She let him sit at her table in a crowded cafe. She had no idea he was a millionaire single father. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The soft hum of conversation filled the afternoon air at Willow Street Cafe. Cups clinked, espresso steamed, and the golden light of late autumn poured through the tall windows. Every seat was taken. Business people tapped on laptops. Students whispered over textbooks, and the smell of roasted coffee beans hung warm and heavy in the air. At a corner table by the window sat Lila Hayes, 27 years old, a freelance artist with her sketchbook spread open. Her fingers were smudged with graphite. The worn strap of her second-hand bag hung from the chair. Rent was due in 3 days, and the deadline for her commission was in 5. Still, she drew. Drawing was the only thing that kept her breathing steadily when the world outside felt too loud. A bell rang softly as the door opened. A tall man stepped in, shaking off the chill. His dark coat carried faint traces of rain, his eyes searching for an empty seat. There were none. People pretended not to notice, staring harder at their phones. He turned toward Lila's table. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm, deep, almost careful. "Would you mind if I sit here, just until something opens up?" Lila looked up, startled. The stranger looked exhausted but polite, with a quiet presence that made her hesitate. For a heartbeat, she considered saying no. Her sketches were everywhere, her coffee nearly cold, but then she noticed the gentle way he held his cup, the faint lines of worry around his eyes. "Sure," she said finally, pushing her bag aside. "As long as you do not block the light. I am working." He smiled faintly, grateful. "I will try not to interfere." He set his laptop down, careful not to touch her sketchbook. For a while, silence stretched between them, comfortable yet fragile. The sound of rain brushed against the glass, mingling with the soft piano playing over the speakers. Then his elbow accidentally brushed her cup. The coffee wobbled, a drop spilling onto the edge of her paper. "Oh no!" Lila gasped, grabbing a napkin. "I am so sorry," he said quickly, reaching to help. Their hands met for a brief second, warm skin against cold fingers, and time seemed to pause. "It is fine," she said, her voice softer now. "Really?" "No." He looked at her sketch, an unfinished drawing of a little girl holding a balloon. His brows lifted. "That is beautiful," he said quietly. Lila blinked, surprised by his sincerity. "Thank you. It is for a children's hospital mural." The stranger nodded, something flickering in his eyes, recognition, maybe pain. "That is a good thing to do," he murmured. She smiled slightly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "It is just my way of making the world a bit lighter." Oh, neither of them knew then that this simple act, sharing a crowded cafe table, would change everything. The next morning, the same cafe glowed with soft sunlight spilling through its tall glass windows. The smell of roasted beans drifted across the room, and steam curled above the espresso machine. Lila sat again at her usual table by the window. Her sketchbook was open, but her pencil had not moved for several minutes. The seat across from her was empty now. She kept replaying the moment from the day before. The quiet stranger, his steady eyes, the way he had apologized for spilling her coffee, and that fleeting second when their hands had touched. It should have been nothing. Just another day, another customer, another sketch. Yet, it lingered in her mind. She brushed the thought away and focused on the paper in front of her. She had a commission due in 3 days. Bills were waiting at home on the kitchen counter. Imagination was supposed to be her strength, but this morning it felt heavy, like a curtain that refused to lift. "Excuse me, miss," a voice said softly. Lila looked up. The same man stood there, now without his coat. He wore a gray sweater, simple but neat. His smile was gentle, a little uncertain. "I was hoping to thank you properly," he said, "for letting me share your table yesterday." She blinked, surprised that he had remembered her at all. "It was just a chair," she replied lightly. "No thanks needed." He nodded but did not move away. "Still, I appreciated it." I had just dropped my daughter off at her music class. The place was full, and your table looked like the only calm corner in the world. Lila paused, intrigued by that detail. Your daughter? Yes, he said, and his eyes softened instantly, as if her name alone carried sunlight. Her name is Sophie. She is 6. She plays piano, though she insists she is a rock star. Lila smiled for the first time that morning. That sounds like a good kind of confidence. He chuckled quietly. She got it from her mother. I mean, from her mother's side. His voice hesitated there, the air shifting just enough to reveal a shadow that passed quickly behind his eyes. She felt it, but chose not to press. Instead, she turned the page in her sketchbook. I draw children sometimes, she said. Hospitals commission murals for their pediatric wings. You could say it is my way of reminding them the world still has colors. He studied the page. There were sketches of children running through fields, holding balloons, playing with kites. You have a kind eye, he said. You see people the way they wish to be seen. Her cheeks warmed a little. That is the nicest thing anyone has said to me this week. I mean it, he said simply. Would you mind if I watch you draw for a bit? I promise I will not spill anything this time. Lila laughed softly. You can sit. Just keep your elbows to yourself. He took the seat again, setting his laptop aside this time. For a while, the cafe noise became a steady rhythm, the hiss of milk, the tap of cups, the murmur of voices. She drew, and he watched, neither speaking much. There was something peaceful about the way he observed, never intrusive, almost reverent. When she finally looked up, he was glancing at his phone. A small smile curved his lips as he read a message. My daughter just finished her class, he said. She asked if we can stop for hot chocolate before going home. I think that means I should go. Lila nodded, closing her sketchbook. You are a good dad. Not every parent remembers to pause for cocoa breaks. He looked at her for a quiet moment, as if measuring the words she had just spoken. Maybe, he said, but some of us need those pauses as much as our kids do. He reached for a napkin, scribbled something quickly, and tore the corner off. If you ever need help printing or scanning those sketches, I have access to a good studio downtown. No pressure. Just consider it a thank you. She hesitated, then took the note. His handwriting was clean and deliberate. The name read Ethan Cole. When he left, the chair across from her felt heavier somehow. The napkin sat beside her coffee cup like a small, folded secret. That evening, the air outside turned crisp. Lila walked home through Maple Avenue, her boots brushing fallen leaves that cracked beneath each step. The note was still in her pocket. She lived in a small studio apartment above a bakery, its windows glowing warm from below. Inside, she brewed a cup of tea and glanced once more at the napkin. Ethan Cole, she whispered, testing how the name sounded aloud. It felt solid, kind. Over the next few days, her routine carried on. She delivered her sketches, visited clients, answered emails. Yet, at every cafe she passed, her eyes unconsciously searched for a tall figure in a gray sweater. Then, one Saturday morning, she walked into the park with her sketchbook to capture the autumn colors. Children ran across the grass, their laughter echoing through the chilly air. And there by the duck pond she saw him. Ethan was kneeling beside a little girl who wore a red knit hat and was carefully feeding crumbs to the ducks. The child giggled when one brave duck waddled closer. Lila froze for a moment, recognizing the joy on both their faces. Then, as if sensing her gaze, the little girl turned and waved. Hi, do you draw pictures? Lila blinked, caught off guard. Sometimes, she said with a smile. Can you draw me and my daddy? The girl asked eagerly. Ethan looked up, startled, but amused. Sophie, maybe she is busy. It is all right, Lila said, walking closer. I have a few minutes. She sat on the nearby bench, opening her sketchbook. Sophie posed proudly beside her father, one hand on his arm. The sunlight slipped through the trees, turning the moment into something golden and fleeting. As Lila sketched, she glanced at Ethan. He looked at his daughter with a tenderness that needed no words. When she finished, she tore the page carefully and handed it to Sophie. The girl's eyes lit up. I love it, she said, hugging the paper like a treasure. Ethan smiled, genuine and grateful. Thank you, he said. Lila shrugged lightly. Consider it my thank you for the company at the cafe." They stood there for a long moment, the world quiet around them, and neither noticed how naturally their stories had begun to intertwine. The following weekend, the city park was alive again with the sound of children's laughter and rustling leaves. Lila returned to the same bench where she had drawn Sophie and her father the week before. She liked that spot, the smell of grass, the soft hum of traffic beyond the trees, and the way sunlight reflected off the pond. It was peaceful, and peace was something she did not often find. She opened her sketchbook to a fresh page, her pencil gliding gently across the paper. Then she heard a familiar voice behind her. "You always work outdoors?" Lila turned and smiled. Ethan stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee. Sophie was beside him, clutching a small paper bag filled with muffins. "Not always," Lila replied, "but light like this is too good to waste." Ethan offered one of the cups. "1 cream, no sugar. I hope that is right." "You seemed like someone who likes coffee without too much in it." She accepted it, surprised that he had noticed. "You are observant, Mr. Cole." He laughed softly. "Just Ethan, please. Mr. Cole makes me sound like I own the park." Sophie climbed onto the bench next to Lila, swinging her legs. "Daddy said you make pictures that make people smile," she said proudly. "That is the goal," Lila said, smiling back. "Maybe I can teach you sometime." Sophie's eyes widened. "Really?" "Sure. But only if your dad promises not to spill coffee on my drawings again." Ethan placed a hand over his heart. "I solemnly swear to be on my best behavior." They all laughed, and the sound blended with the wind in the trees. For a while, they simply enjoyed the day, Lila sketching, Sophie nibbling on a muffin, Ethan watching quietly. It felt like a scene from a life none of them had planned but all of them needed. Later, as the sun began to dip, Sophie asked to feed the ducks again. Ethan handed her the bag of crumbs, and she ran toward the pond, her laughter echoing. Lila and Ethan stayed behind, sitting a few feet apart. "She is a bright kid," Lila said softly. "She is my whole world," he replied. His voice was gentle, but there was weight beneath it. "Her mother passed away 3 years ago, a sudden illness. Since then, it has just been the 2 of us." Lila's heart tightened. "I am sorry," she said quietly. He nodded, eyes still fixed on Sophie. "Thank you. She keeps me grounded. I work too much, and I am gone more often than I want to admit. But when she laughs, it feels like I am doing something right." "Oh?" Lila studied his face for a moment, the tired lines near his eyes, the quiet sincerity. He did not look like the kind of man who wanted pity. He looked like someone who had survived loss by learning how to keep moving. "I think you are doing better than you realize," she said finally. Ethan turned toward her, meeting her gaze. "You are kind, Lila." She shrugged, embarrassed by the way her name sounded in his voice. "I just tell the truth." "No." Before he could reply, Sophie came running back, holding the drawing Lila had given her the week before. "Daddy, can we put this in my room?" Ethan smiled. "Of course we can." Then Sophie turned to Lila. "Do you want to come see it? It will look nice above my bookshelf." Lila laughed softly. "Maybe another day, sweetheart." The word slipped out naturally, sweetheart, and for a second, Ethan looked at her with quiet warmth that said more than words could. When they left the park, Lila stayed behind, watching them walk away. The sketchbook rested open on her lap, but her pencil did not move. Instead, she traced the faint outline of a family she had drawn long ago, a husband, a wife, and a child beneath an umbrella. She had drawn it after her parents' divorce, back when she still believed art could fix broken things. That evening, she returned to her small apartment. She placed her sketchbook on the table, brewed a cup of tea, and turned on the radio. The soft hum of an old jazz tune filled the room. For the first time in months, she felt less alone. A few days later, while Lila was sketching in the cafe, the bell above the door chimed. Sophie's laughter echoed before Lila even looked up. The girl ran straight toward her, waving excitedly. "Miss Lila?" Lila smiled. "Well, hello again. Shouldn't you be in school?" "It is Saturday," Sophie said proudly, climbing onto the chair opposite her. "Daddy said we could stop by for breakfast. He is just getting our order." Ethan appeared moments later, carrying a tray with 2 mugs of cocoa and a coffee. "I hope we are not interrupting your work." "Not at all," Lila said. "I could use the company." They shared the table, just as they had the first day they met. This time, though, It was different. The air between them was lighter, more familiar. Sophie told stories about school, about how she wanted to be an astronaut who could paint stars. Lila laughed and promised to draw that dream someday. When the waitress brought the check, Ethan reached for it. "This one is on me," he said firmly. Lila started to protest, but he raised a hand. "Please, consider it repayment for the coffee disaster." She smiled. "In that case, I accept." Ugh. Outside, rain had begun to fall softly, turning the city streets into mirrors of light. Ethan opened his umbrella, holding it above Sophie's head. Then he paused and extended it toward Lila. "Come on," he said. "We will walk you to the bus stop." Under the small umbrella, their shoulders brushed. Sophie skipped ahead, singing to herself. For a brief moment, it felt like they belonged together, three silhouettes moving through the quiet rhythm of rain. At the bus stop, Lila turned to say goodbye. "Thank you for the walk," she said. Ethan's eyes met hers. "Thank you for letting us in." The bus arrived, hissing softly. Lila stepped aboard, glancing back through the glass. Sophie waved both hands, her red hat bright against the gray drizzle. Lila waved back, a soft smile curving her lips. She did not know what the future held, but something inside her whispered that their paths would cross again. And somewhere behind her, Ethan stood in the rain for a long time, watching the bus disappear, realizing that for the first time in years, his world felt less empty. A week later, the air in the city carried the first chill of winter. The park trees had begun to shed their last leaves, and the sunlight arrived weaker each morning. Lila had been working non-stop to finish a mural design for a children's hospital. Her table at Willow Street Café was now a small island of pencils, coffee cups, and paper sheets layered with color. She had not seen Ethan or Sophie for several days. That should not have mattered after all. They were strangers who had simply shared a few warm afternoons. But somehow, the café felt quieter without their laughter. Lila was packing up when a familiar voice reached her. "Still working late, I see." She looked up and smiled. Ethan stood at the counter, holding a small bouquet of daisies and a takeout box. He looked tired, but his smile was real. "Daisies in winter?" she said. "That is ambitious." "They were Sophie's idea," he said, setting the flowers down. "She said you make everything brighter, so they should match." Lila laughed softly. "That is very sweet of her." "She also made me promise to deliver this," Ethan added, handing her the takeout box. "She insisted you probably forget to eat when you are working." He was right. Lila blinked, touched by the thought. She is an excellent judge of artists. Ethan leaned slightly against the counter. "Actually, she wants to ask if you could come to her school's art fair next Saturday. She has been drawing every day since you gave her that first lesson in the park." Lila hesitated, surprised. "Me? At her school?" "Yes. She says she needs her teacher of color and imagination to see her masterpiece." He smiled. "I think that means you." Lila's heart softened. "Tell her I would love to come." Ethan's eyes warmed, a mix of gratitude and relief. "She will be thrilled." That Saturday arrived gray and cold, but the elementary school gym buzzed with life. The walls were lined with drawings of stars, houses, animals, and stick figures with enormous smiles. Lila walked through the rows of tables until she spotted Sophie, standing proudly beside a poster covered in glitter and color. "Miss Lila," Sophie squealed, running up to her. "You came?" "Of course I did," Lila said. "So, which one is yours?" Sophie pointed to a large piece of paper taped neatly on the wall. It showed three figures sitting under a tree. A man, a woman, and a little girl between them holding a balloon. The sky above them was painted gold. "It is us," Sophie said proudly. "Me, Daddy, and you. I called it the lucky table." Lila's breath caught for a second. The drawing was simple, but the feeling in it was pure. She knelt beside Sophie. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "You have a gift, sweetheart." Ethan appeared behind them, hands in his coat pockets, smiling as he looked at the drawing. "She worked on that all week," he said. "I think she likes having you around." Lila looked up at him. "The feeling is mutual." For the rest of the morning, they wandered through the fair together. Ethan helped the kids clean paintbrushes, while Lila showed them how to mix colors. Sophie never stopped talking. Parents smiled at the sight, a quiet father, a bright daughter, and the young artist who seemed to fit perfectly between them. When the fair ended, Ethan offered to walk Lila home. The sky had turned pale blue, streaked with clouds that promised snow. They stopped at the same cafe where they had first met. The barista, already familiar with them, smiled knowingly as they ordered. At a table near the window, Ethan stirred his coffee absent-mindedly. "You are good with her," he said. "Sophie does not open up easily. Since her mother passed, she has been shy around new people. But with you, she is different." She laughs again. Lila listened quietly. "Sometimes kids just need someone to see them. Maybe she feels safe with me because I see her as she is, not as someone broken." Ethan's eyes lifted. "Thank you," he said simply. "I did not realize how much we both needed that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall, melting as they touched the window glass. "Do you miss your wife?" Lila asked softly, almost afraid to break the quiet. He nodded slowly. "Every day. But the grief changes. It becomes quieter. Sophie helps with that. And people like you remind me that the world can still be kind." Lila lowered her gaze, unsure how to answer. "I think kindness finds its way back when you least expect it," she said. He smiled, but the expression carried something fragile. "You sound like someone who knows that firsthand." She shrugged. "Everyone has a story, Ethan." When they left the cafe, snow was falling steadily. Ethan opened his umbrella and held it above her again. The small gesture felt oddly familiar, like a promise silently repeated. They walked slowly down Maple Avenue, their breath visible in the cold air. At the corner where their paths separated, Ethan stopped. "Lila," he said, hesitating for a second. "Would you like to come by our place sometime? Sophie wants to show you her room. She hung your sketch on the wall and insists it needs your signature." Lila smiled. "I would love that." He exhaled, relief softening his shoulders. "Good. Then it is settled. Friday evening? I will cook dinner. Something simple." "You cook too?" she teased. "I try," he said with a grin. "Though Sophie might tell you otherwise." They laughed, and for a moment, the cold did not seem so sharp. When Lila finally reached her apartment, she placed the daisies on the windowsill. Their yellow petals caught the faint glow of the streetlight outside. She opened her sketchbook and began to draw the cafe window again, the reflection of snow, the curve of a smile, and a hand offering shelter under an umbrella. As she shaded the last line, she realized she was smiling without even meaning to. Something was shifting quietly between them, something tender, patient, and real. And somewhere across the city, Ethan tucked Sophie into bed. She held her drawing close, whispering, "Good night, Miss Lila." Ethan turned off the light, the faintest smile touching his lips, wondering how one small act of kindness in a crowded cafe had started to heal parts of his life he did not even know were still broken. Friday evening arrived with a pale winter sunset and a quiet promise in the air. Lila stood outside the gate of Ethan's townhouse, holding a small wrapped box, a set of watercolor pencils she had bought for Sophie. Her breath clouded in the cold as she pressed the doorbell. The door opened almost immediately. Sophie's voice echoed from inside, bright and full of excitement. "Miss Lila, you are here!" Before Lila could respond, the little girl ran forward and hugged her waist. Ethan appeared behind her, smiling. He wore a dark sweater, sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly tousled from cooking. The scent of something warm and comforting drifted through the doorway. "Come in," he said. "Dinner is almost ready. Sophie has been asking every 5 minutes if you were coming." Lila stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the soft light. The house was cozy and lived in books, stacked neatly on a shelf, drawings taped to the fridge, and the faint sound of jazz playing from a small speaker. It was not the home of a wealthy man. It was the home of someone who valued warmth over luxury. Sophie led her by the hand to the dining table. In the center sat a small vase filled with daisies, just like the ones Ethan had given her before. "Daddy said flowers make food taste better," Sophie declared proudly. "I think he is right," Lila said, smiling. Dinner was simple but delicious: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and fresh bread from a nearby bakery. They ate together, laughter flowing easily between stories. Sophie told tales from school, and Ethan listened with quiet amusement while Lila added little jokes that made the girl giggle uncontrollably. Afterward, they moved to the living room. Sophie brought out her sketchbook and flipped through pages filled with drawings, flowers, stars, and a few stick figures labeled Me and Daddy. On the last page, she had drawn Lila standing beside them, holding a giant paintbrush like a sword. Lila laughed. "I look like a superhero." "You are," Sophie said seriously. "You make sad things pretty." The words caught Lila off guard. For a moment, she could not speak. Ethan met her eyes from across the room, and the look they shared said everything that words could not. When Sophie finally grew tired, Ethan tucked her into bed. Lila waited quietly in the living room, listening to the soft murmur of his voice down the hallway. A few minutes later, he returned carrying 2 cups of tea. "She falls asleep faster when someone reads to her," he said, handing her a cup. "Her mother used to do that. Now she asks me to read fairy tales, even though I am terrible at voices." Lila smiled, taking a sip. "You are doing just fine. She is happy, and that is what matters." They sat near the window, the city lights flickering beyond the glass. For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them was not empty. It was comfortable, almost sacred. "Can I show you something?" Ethan asked at last. He rose, went to a nearby shelf, and pulled out a framed piece of paper. It was the sketch Lila had drawn that first day in the park, Sophie holding a balloon, Ethan sitting beside her. "I had it framed," he said. "Sophie calls it her good luck picture. She says it reminds her that people still care." Lila traced the glass lightly with her fingertips. "She is not wrong," she said softly. Ethan studied her face for a moment. "You have changed things for us, Lila. I am not sure you realize how much." "I just drew what I saw," she replied. "You and your daughter have more light around you than you think." He looked as if he wanted to say something more, but instead he just smiled and set the frame back on the shelf. "Sophie made something for you. Wait here." He disappeared into the hallway and returned holding a small envelope decorated with colorful stickers. Inside was a tiny sketchbook, no larger than Lila's palm. On the first page, written in a child's handwriting, were the words, "For Miss Lila, to draw happy days." Lila's eyes glistened. "She made this?" "She did," Ethan said quietly. "She told me. Now Miss Lila can draw the days that make her smile. Not just the ones that make her sad." Lila laughed softly through the tears forming in her eyes. "She is something special." "So are you," he said gently. The room grew quiet again, the only sound the faint hum of the city outside. Lila set the little sketchbook on her lap, her fingers brushing the cover. "I have not felt this kind of peace in a long time," she admitted. Ethan leaned back, watching her. Maybe peace just needed someone to open the door for it. They talked late into the evening about art, about parenting, about the strange way kindness seemed to circle back when you least expected it. When Lila finally stood to leave, Ethan walked her to the door. Snow was falling again, soft and slow, blanketing the street in white. He held the door open, and the cold air slipped inside, crisp and clean. "Thank you for dinner," she said. "And for the company." He smiled. "Thank you for saying yes." She hesitated on the porch, reluctant to break the stillness. "I will see you both soon." Ethan nodded. "You will. Sophie will not let you forget." As Lila stepped out into the snow, she glanced back once more. Through the window, she could see Ethan turning off the lights, his movements steady and familiar. The warmth of the house glowed against the night like a small beacon. She walked home slowly, her boots crunching through the snow, the tiny sketchbook pressed safely against her chest. That night, before she went to sleep, she opened it and drew the scene exactly as she remembered it: 3 cups of tea, a child's laughter down the hallway, and the quiet comfort of belonging somewhere again. And across the city, Ethan stood by Sophie's bedside, brushing her hair back gently as she dreamed. He whispered softly, "Good night, my brave girl." Then, as he turned off the light, his eyes fell on the framed drawing on the wall. Beneath it, he placed the fresh bouquet of daisies. Lila had brought with her a small reminder of how simple moments can grow into something that feels like hope. The following week brought a burst of cold air and clear blue skies. The holidays were approaching, and the city had already started decorating with twinkling lights and wreaths hanging from street lamps. Willow Street Café, where it had all begun, now smelled of cinnamon and pine. Lila sat by her usual window, sketching gift tags for a local charity event. Her fingers moved quickly, but her thoughts drifted elsewhere. She had spent nearly every weekend with Ethan and Sophie for the past month. What had begun as chance meetings had turned into a quiet routine: art lessons at the park, movie nights at Ethan's house, breakfast on Sunday mornings. She smiled to herself at the thought of Sophie's giggles echoing through the kitchen, the way Ethan would pretend to burn the pancakes just to make her laugh. It all felt so natural, so easy, and yet there was a small corner of her heart whispering caution. She reminded herself that life had never been simple for her. Good things often came with an expiration date. Her pencil paused mid-line when she saw movement outside the window. Ethan stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee and smiling at her through the glass. She waved him in, and moments later, he was standing across from her, brushing snow from his coat. "You always look busy," he said warmly. "Do artists ever rest?" "Only when they forget what they are chasing," she replied, closing her sketchbook. "What brings you here in the middle of a workday?" "I had a meeting nearby," he said, handing her one of the coffees. "Thought I would stop by to see how my favorite artist is doing." She accepted the cup, laughing. "Flattery will not get you a free sketch. I was hoping it would get me 5 minutes of your time," he said. "You have 10, she answered. They sat in comfortable silence, watching snow fall against the window. The café's music played softly in the background. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice gentler now. "Sophie keeps asking if we can get you something for Christmas. She insists you need a proper art studio." Lila smiled. "She is sweet, but I am fine working from my kitchen table." He looked at her for a long moment. "You deserve more than a kitchen table." Before she could respond, a woman's voice broke the quiet. "Ethan? Is that you?" Lila turned toward the sound. A tall woman in a sleek coat approached their table. Her posture was elegant, her tone confident. Ethan's expression shifted, slightly surprised but polite. "Clara," he said, standing. "It has been a while." Lila watched quietly as they exchanged small talk. Clara mentioned a recent business conference, then turned to Lila with a curious smile. "And who is this?" "Lila Hayes," Ethan said quickly. "She is a friend." Clara's eyes flickered with subtle interest. "A friend," she repeated, the word lingering just a moment too long. "Well, it is nice to meet you. Ethan and I worked together for years at Cole Group." Lila froze. Cole Group. She had heard that name before. It was the large corporation that owned several properties across the city, including the building where the café was located. After a few more polite words, Clara excused herself, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume. Ethan sat back down, but Lila's mind was spinning. "Cole Group," she said slowly. "Is that where you work?" Ethan hesitated. "Yes. As what, exactly?" He met her eyes. For a second, he looked like he wanted to tell her the truth. But then he simply said, "Management." Something inside her tightened. She wanted to believe him, but the word sounded careful, too careful. Before she could press further, his phone buzzed. He checked the screen and sighed. "I am sorry, Lila. I have to handle this. Can we talk later?" She nodded, but her chest felt heavy. As he left, she noticed the barista whispering to another customer. "That man? He is Ethan Cole. You know, the CEO of Cole Group." The words hit her like a quiet storm. CEO. Lila sat frozen, her fingers tightening around the coffee cup. Images flashed through her mind: Ethan's modest house, his simple clothes. The way he had spoken about work without ever explaining what he did. She realized he had been careful not to say too much. For the rest of the day, she could not focus. She walked home through the icy streets, her breath turning to mist. Questions swirled like snowflakes around her. Why had he hidden it? Did he think she would treat him differently? Or worse, had this all been some kind of game to him? That evening, her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "I am sorry for rushing out earlier. Can I see you tomorrow?" She stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back. "Maybe another time. I need to think." The next morning, she sat by her window, sketchbook open but untouched. The little sketchbook Sophie had made for her sat beside it, its first page filled with cheerful drawings. Lila touched the cover gently, her heart aching with confusion. She reminded herself that Ethan had always been kind, always genuine. But now every gesture felt uncertain, shadowed by the truth he had not shared. A few days passed in silence. The snow outside deepened, muffling the world in stillness. Each morning, she half expected a knock on the door, a text, a sign, but none came. Then, one night, as she was cleaning her brushes, there was a soft tap at her door. She opened it to find Ethan standing there, his hair dusted with snow, his eyes tired but determined. "Lila," he said quietly, "please, let me explain." She hesitated, every emotion colliding inside her. "You could have told me," she whispered. "You let me believe you were just another struggling dad." "Why?" His voice was calm, but there was pain beneath it. "Because I wanted someone to see me, not my money, not the company, just me. I did not expect to meet you, but once I did, I could not figure out how to tell you without losing what we had." Her eyes filled with tears, she refused to let fall. "You already lost it by lying." He stood there silently as the wind howled outside. For the first time since they met, there was no warmth between them, only the cold truth of two worlds colliding. And somewhere down the hall, the little sketchbook on her table remained open to the first page. Its title, written in Sophie's bright handwriting, read, "Happy Days." The following days passed in a blur of silence. Snow covered the sidewalks in thick white layers, and the city seemed to move slower, softer, quieter. Inside her small apartment, Lila tried to lose herself in work, but her pencil refused to obey. Every time she looked at the paper, she saw Ethan's face at her door, his voice echoing, "I wanted someone to see me, not my money." She had wanted to believe him. Part of her still did, but another part could not forget how easily he had kept that secret. One evening, as the light faded into a pale gray dusk, her phone vibrated on the table. The screen showed a message from an unknown number. "Miss Lila, this is Sophie. Daddy is sad. He does not smile anymore. Can you come to the park? Please?" Lila stared at the words for a long moment. Her throat tightened. The ache she had tried to bury rose again. She hesitated, torn between the hurt that still lingered and the image of the little girl's handwriting, uneven but sincere. Half an hour later, she found herself walking through the park, her scarf pulled tightly around her neck. The snow crunched under her boots. By the duck pond, she saw a small figure in a red knit hat. Sophie was sitting on a bench, swinging her legs, clutching a stuffed rabbit. When the girl saw Lila, her face lit up. "You came," she said, jumping up. Lila smiled gently. "Of course I did. You called me." Sophie ran toward her, wrapping small arms around her waist. "Daddy said you are busy, but I told him you always have time for friends." Lila's chest ached. "Your daddy is a very kind man," she said softly. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. It does not mean they stop caring." Sophie looked up at her with wide, curious eyes. "Did you and Daddy have a fight?" Lila hesitated. "Something like that." "Daddy said he made a big mistake," Sophie said seriously. "He said he tried to do something right and did it wrong instead. I told him he should say sorry with hot chocolate." Lila laughed quietly. "That sounds like a good plan." Before she could say more, Sophie's voice brightened. "Daddy!" "Oh." Ethan was standing a few yards away, his coat dusted with snow, his expression uncertain. He walked toward them slowly, his hands in his pockets. "Sophie," he said gently, "I thought you were feeding the ducks." "I was," she said proudly. "But now I am helping." He smiled faintly. "Helping?" "Helping you fix things," she said, then looked at Lila with all the seriousness a 6-year-old could muster. "You two should talk. I will go feed the ducks again." Before either of them could stop her, she skipped away, leaving them standing in the soft glow of the park's winter lights. Ethan exhaled, his breath misting in the air. "I did not know she messaged you," he said quietly. "She must have found your number in my phone." "I am sorry." "It is all right," Lila said, though her voice trembled slightly. "She has a good heart." He nodded. "She does. She gets that from her mother." Silence settled between them. The sound of distant laughter and the crunch of snow filled the space they could not yet bridge. Finally, Ethan spoke again. "Lila, I know I should have told you the truth. I was wrong. I thought if I kept that part of my life separate, I could be someone real for once. I wanted you to know me before the world I live in got in the way. You think I would have cared about that?" she asked, her voice breaking. You did not even give me the chance. Oh. He looked at her, pain flickering in his eyes. I was afraid. Everyone I meet sees what I have, not who I am. When you looked at me that first day, it was different. I did not want to lose that. Lila shook her head. But you lost it anyway, not because of who you are, but because you did not trust me to see you. The truth hung between them, cold and sharp like the winter air. I do trust you, Ethan said, stepping closer. More than anyone. That is why I am here. I want to make it right. Ah, she met his gaze, her heart twisting. You cannot fix everything with an apology, Ethan. I know, he said softly. But I can start with honesty. He took a deep breath. Yes, I am the CEO of Cole Group. The company has been in my family for decades. I took over after my father passed. It is stressful, it is public, and it never lets me rest. I wanted to escape that for a while. When I met you, it was the first time in years I felt like a man again, not a name on a building. Lila looked down at the snow, struggling to find words. You could have told me that from the start. I would have understood. I was afraid you would walk away, he said. I am walking away now, she whispered. He closed his eyes, the hurt in his face raw and unguarded. I deserve that. They stood in silence for a moment before Sophie's laughter carried back to them, light and innocent. She was chasing a duck across the ice, her red hat bouncing as she ran. Lila watched her, then turned back to Ethan. Sophie should not see us like this, she said quietly. She deserves joy, not confusion. Ethan nodded, his voice barely audible. I will tell her everything is fine. Lila forced a small smile. You do that. She loves you very much. And I love her, he said softly. More than anything. Lila looked at him one last time. Then do what is best for her. She turned and began walking toward the park's exit. Snowflakes swirled around her, melting into her hair. Behind her, Ethan stood watching, his heart breaking quietly, as Sophie ran up to him and took his hand. Daddy, she asked, is Miss Lila coming back soon? He knelt beside her, his voice steady but low. I do not know, sweetheart, but I hope so. Sophie looked toward the path where Lila had disappeared. I think she will, she said confidently, because people who draw happy things do not stop caring. Oh, Ethan smiled faintly through the ache in his chest. Maybe you are right, he said. As they walked home through the falling snow, the park lights faded behind them. And though Lila was gone from sight, the echo of Sophie's laughter lingered in the cold night air, like a quiet promise that this story was not over yet. Winter deepened over the next few weeks, wrapping the city in silver frost and long shadows. Lila spent most of her time inside her apartment, surrounded by unfinished sketches. The art that once brought her comfort now felt heavy, as if every page reminded her of the silence that had replaced laughter. She tried to convince herself that distance was the right choice. Ethan had his world, his company, his responsibilities. She had hers. They came from different lives, different expectations. But every night, when she walked past the little sketchbook Sophie had made for her, her heart softened. On its cover, the words, "Happy Days," looked back at her, written in uneven crayon letters. One evening, as snow fell in steady waves outside, she heard a knock on her door. When she opened it, she found a familiar figure, not Ethan, but his assistant, a kind, older woman named Mrs. Lang, who had once helped at one of Sophie's school events. Miss Hayes, Mrs. Lang said warmly, I am sorry to drop by unannounced. Mr. Cole asked me to deliver this. She handed over a small envelope sealed with gold wax. Lila thanked her and closed the door. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Inside was a folded note and a small photograph. The note read, Lila, thank you for everything you have done for Sophie and for me. I will be leaving for a business trip abroad this weekend. It may be a while before I return. Sophie will stay with her grandmother during my absence. I wanted to say goodbye properly, but I know you need space. Please take care of yourself. Ethan. She turned the photograph over. It was of Sophie at the park, holding her drawing of the three of them under the tree. On the back, in Sophie's handwriting, were the words, Miss Lila, do not forget to draw happy things. Lila pressed the picture to her chest, Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. That night, she could not sleep. She thought of Ethan on an airplane, of Sophie's smile, of the warmth they had shared. She realized that though she had wanted to protect her heart, she had only built a wall that hurt all of them. The next morning, she woke early, packed her sketchbook, and took the bus across town. She found herself standing in front of the Cole Group, building a tall glass tower that reflected the gray sky. It was a place she had never imagined entering, yet here she was. At the reception desk, the young woman looked up politely. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" Lila hesitated. "No, but I need to see Mr. Ethan Cole before he leaves." The receptionist typed quickly, then frowned. "I am sorry, ma'am. Mr. Cole's car just left for the airport about 10 minutes ago." Lila's chest tightened. She thanked the woman and ran outside, waving down a cab. The streets were slick with ice, but she gave the driver the destination and sat clutching her bag, praying she would not be too late. When she reached the airport, the terminals were crowded with travelers rushing through the cold. She scanned the faces desperately until she spotted him near the security checkpoint, tall and calm in his dark coat, a suitcase at his side. "Ethan!" she called out. He turned, startled. For a moment, disbelief crossed his face, then relief. "Lila?" She walked toward him, breathless from the run, her heart pounding. "You were really going to leave without saying goodbye?" "I thought that is what you wanted," he said quietly. "I did not want to make things harder." Lila took a step closer. "You already did, but not because of what you told me, because you left without giving me a chance to forgive you." Ethan's eyes softened, his voice unsteady. "Do you?" "I do not know yet," she said honestly. "But I know this, I miss Sophie. I miss our quiet mornings and your terrible pancakes. I miss the peace that came from being around you both. That has to mean something." He exhaled slowly, a small smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. "It means everything to me." They stood in the busy terminal, people hurrying past, announcements echoing overhead. For a moment, the noise faded, and all that existed was the space between them. "I do not belong in your world, Ethan," she said. "But maybe it is not about worlds. Maybe it is just about people choosing to show up for each other." He looked at her, and something in his expression changed, like the weight he had been carrying finally lifted. "Then let me show up," he said softly. "Not as the CEO, not as someone with a title, just as me." Lila nodded slowly. "Then stay." He hesitated, glancing at the departure gate. "The board is expecting me." "Then make them wait," she said gently. "For once, choose what your heart needs." For a moment, he did not move. Then he closed his suitcase, turned off his phone and said, "All right." They walked out together, the cold air biting at their cheeks as they stepped into the snow-covered parking lot. Lila looked up at him, half smiling. "You just abandoned a plane full of important people." "I would rather lose a flight than lose another chance," he said. Later that afternoon, they drove to the park. Sophie was there with her grandmother, feeding ducks near the frozen pond. When she saw them, she squealed in delight. "Daddy! Miss Lila!" Lila knelt to hug her. "I heard you told your dad to fix things with hot chocolate," she said. Sophie nodded proudly. "Did it work?" Ethan smiled, looking at both of them. "I think it did." They bought 3 cups of cocoa from a nearby stand and sat together on the same bench where everything had begun. The snow sparkled under the pale sun, and for the first time in weeks, laughter returned to the air. Lila took out her sketchbook and began to draw Ethan, Sophie, the ducks, and the steam curling from their cups. It was simple, imperfect, and beautiful. When she finished, Sophie leaned against her shoulder. "See, Miss Lila," she whispered. "You remembered to draw happy things." Lila smiled. "Yes, sweetheart, I finally did." "No." And as Ethan reached over to place his hand gently over hers, the world seemed to quiet again. Not with the silence of distance, but with the peace of 2 hearts learning to forgive. The following week arrived with clear skies and the faint smell of spring hiding beneath the cold. The snow had begun to melt, dripping slowly from the rooftops, leaving the city wet and shining. Life at Willow Street Café had returned to its usual rhythm, but at the corner table by the window, where everything had started, something had changed. Lila sat with her sketchbook open, a steaming cup of coffee beside her. Across from her sat Ethan, dressed more casually than she had ever seen him. Sophie sat between them, her legs swinging happily, a chocolate muffin in her hands. "Daddy, do you remember the first time you met Miss Lila here?" Sophie asked, crumbs dotting her lips. Ethan smiled. "I do. I was just looking for a seat." "Aye." "And I said yes, only because you looked harmless," Lila teased. Sophie giggled. "You were both lucky," she said confidently, "because now we can all sit together." Ethan and Lila exchanged a quiet look, one filled with warmth and the kind of understanding that only time could build. For the first time, everything felt simple again. After breakfast, they walked through the park. The pond was still partially frozen, but sunlight bounced off the thin layer of ice, creating little sparks of gold. Sophie ran ahead, her laughter echoing through the crisp air. Lila walked beside Ethan, her hands tucked into her coat pockets. "She is happy again," she said softly. "She is," Ethan agreed. "And so am I," Lila smiled. "I was angry at you," she admitted. "But not for the reason you think. I was angry because I missed you more than I wanted to." Unquote. Ethan looked at her with quiet affection. "I missed you too. Every day." They stopped at the bench near the pond, the same bench where Sophie had once asked Lila to draw her. The same bench where forgiveness had begun. Ethan brushed snow from the seat, and they sat down, watching Sophie chase the ducks along the edge of the water. "You know," Ethan said slowly, "when I first met you, I thought it was just coincidence. But lately, I've started to believe that maybe life has a way of placing people exactly where they need to be." Lila tilted her head. "You mean like fate?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe not fate, maybe just kindness that circles back." For a moment, neither spoke. The world around them was quiet, except for the gentle sound of melting snow dripping from the trees. Then Ethan turned slightly toward her. "I have been thinking about something," he said. "About what we talked about at the airport about showing up." Lila waited, her breath visible in the cold air. "I want to keep showing up," he continued. "Not just for Sophie, but for you. I know I made mistakes, and I know trust does not rebuild overnight. But I am here. No secrets, no walls, just us." Her heart fluttered. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they had endured. "That sounds like a promise," she said. "It is," he replied, "if you will let it be." "No." Lila looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "Then you will have to earn it," she said softly. "Not with grand gestures, just with honesty." He nodded. "That I can do." Sophie came running back, her cheeks rosy from the cold. "Miss Lila, look," she said, holding out a small snowball. "It is shaped like a heart." Lila laughed. "It is perfect." "Daddy said hearts are hard to keep," Sophie said seriously. "You have to hold them gently or they melt." Ethan smiled down at his daughter. "That is true, sweetheart." Lila looked at the small heart of snow in Sophie's mitten and felt something shift inside her. Something that had been heavy now felt light again. Later that afternoon, Ethan invited them both to the children's hospital where the mural project was finally complete. The once blank wall now shimmered with color fields, balloons, smiling faces, and a giant tree at the center, with 3 figures sitting under it. Lila stood back, taking in the sight. "It turned out better than I imagined," she whispered. "It turned out exactly the way you made it," Ethan said, full of hope. As the hospital staff and children admired the painting, Sophie tugged on Lila's sleeve. "You forgot to sign it," she said. Lila smiled and knelt beside her. "Where should I put my name?" Sophie pointed to the base of the tree. "Right here," she said, "so it never washes away." "Oh." Lila took a small brush and wrote her name carefully in the corner. Then, at Sophie's insistence, she added Ethan's, and Sophie's initials, too. When she stood, Ethan was watching her. His eyes were filled with something deeper than gratitude, something like certainty. As they left the hospital, the sky had turned soft and pink. The air smelled faintly of rain instead of snow. They walked side by side toward the parking lot. "I think the mural needs one more thing," Ethan said. "Oh?" Lila asked. "What is missing?" "A title," he said. "Sophie called it the lucky table, remember?" Lila smiled. "It fits. That table changed everything." "It did," he agreed. "But not because of luck, because of you." Lila's heart stirred again. You give me too much credit. He shook his head. No, you gave me something I forgot. I needed a reason to believe in small miracles. She stopped walking and looked at him, the fading light catching in her eyes. Ethan, she said softly, maybe it is not about miracles. Maybe it is just about people who refuse to give up on each other. He smiled, the kind of smile that carried both history and hope. Then I guess I am not giving up. Sophie skipped ahead of them, singing to herself, her red hat bouncing with each step. Lila watched her and felt warmth spread through her chest. They reached the car, and as Ethan opened the door for her, she looked up at him. You know, someday, Sophie is going to grow up and realize her dad is the hero of every story. Ethan chuckled. And she will know her hero had a very good teacher. As they drove away, the city lights glimmered against the wet pavement. Inside the car, Sophie leaned against Lila's arm, already half asleep. Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror, then back at Lila, their eyes meeting in quiet understanding. The world outside continued moving, but for them, time slowed. It felt as though every moment the cafe, the park, the laughter, even the heartbreak had been leading here. And somewhere deep in her heart, Lila finally knew that she was no longer sitting at a crowded cafe, waiting for life to happen. She was already living it one honest, imperfect, beautiful day at a time. 2 months passed, and the bitter winter finally surrendered to early spring. The last traces of snow melted into the soft earth, and the park, once quiet and gray, filled again with color and sound. Children ran through the grass, kites painted the sky, and the air smelled faintly of blooming lilacs. For Lila, life had settled into a peaceful rhythm. Her mural at the hospital had brought new attention to her work, and small commissions were starting to come in. Yet, what filled her days with meaning was not the art itself, it was the laughter that now regularly echoed through her world. Ethan and Sophie had become a constant part of her life, a small family bound not by blood, but by shared kindness. That Saturday morning, the three of them met at the park again. Lila carried a picnic basket, Ethan had a blanket, and Sophie clutched a small sketchbook covered in stickers. The same bench where they had first met sat beneath a tree now heavy with green buds. Sophie skipped ahead, calling out, "Miss Lila, look, the ducks came back." Lila smiled, settling the basket on the grass. "They must have missed you." Ethan spread out the blanket and sat down beside her. "She has been talking about this all week," he said, watching Sophie toss crumbs into the pond. "I've been talking about it too," Lila replied softly. "Though mostly to myself." "Oh." Ethan turned to her, his expression gentle. "You sound happy." "I am," she said, "happier than I have been in years." For a moment, they simply watched Sophie. The child's laughter mixed with the chatter of birds and the rustle of the wind through the trees. Ethan leaned back on his elbows. "You know, Sophie keeps a list of things she calls her happy moments. She adds to it every night before bed." Lila smiled. "That sounds like her." "Oh, she told me she added something new last night," he continued. "She said, 'Today Daddy and Miss Lila laughed at the same time, and it sounded like music.'" Lila's cheeks warmed. "She notices everything." Ethan's tone softened. "So do you." The words hung between them like a quiet confession. Lila looked away, focusing on the pond. "You said once that kindness circles back," she said. "Maybe that is what this is. Kindness coming full circle." "Oh." He studied her profile, sunlight glinting off her hair. "Or maybe it is something more." Before she could answer, Sophie ran back toward them, clutching her small sketchbook. "I made something," she said proudly, opening the pages. Inside were colorful drawings, Lila with her paintbrush, Ethan holding a cup of coffee, and Sophie in her red hat. On the last page, the three of them stood beneath a tree with the words "Our Happy Table" written above in crayon. "It is wonderful," Lila said, her voice thick with emotion. Sophie beamed. "Can we put it next to the mural at the hospital, so everyone knows this story has a happy ending?" Ethan chuckled softly. "That is up to Miss Lila." Lila brushed a tear from her cheek. "I think that is a perfect idea." They spent the rest of the afternoon enjoying the warmth of the Sunday. Sophie chased butterflies while Lila sketched, and Ethan read quietly beside her. It felt like time had slowed, holding them in a bubble of peace. When the sun began to dip low, painting the sky in orange and rose, Ethan turned to her. "Lila, there is something I want to give you." He reached into his bag and pulled out a small box wrapped in simple brown paper. She frowned, surprised. "What is this?" "Open it," he said. Inside was a delicate gold pendant in the shape of a tiny paintbrush. Lila looked up, eyes wide. "Ethan, it is not about luxury," he said quickly. "It is a symbol. You once told me that art is how you see the world. For me, you are how I found mine again." Her heart caught in her throat. "That is very poetic for a businessman." He laughed softly. "I am learning from an artist." Sophie ran over and clapped her hands. "It is so pretty. Miss Lila, you have to wear it." Lila hesitated for a moment, then smiled and let Ethan fasten the chain around her neck. The pendant rested lightly against her collarbone, warm from his touch. "Thank you," she said quietly. He met her gaze, his voice barely above a whisper. "No, thank you for letting me sit at your table that day." Lila laughed softly, remembering. "You mean for invading my workspace? For starting my life over," he said. The sincerity in his tone made her chest tighten. For a moment, neither of them moved. The sounds of the park faded, and the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. Then Sophie's voice broke the silence. "Daddy, can we take a picture? So we never forget today?" Ethan smiled and pulled out his phone. Sophie climbed onto his knee while Lila leaned close. The camera clicked, capturing their laughter, the golden light, and the bond that had grown stronger with every passing day. As the sun set, they packed up and began walking toward the cafe. The street lights flickered on one by one, glowing softly against the dusky sky. "Do you think fate planned all this?" Lila asked as they walked. Ethan thought for a moment. "Maybe fate opened the door," he said. "But kindness is what made us walk through it." Sophie slipped her small hand into Lila's. "Does that mean we are a family now?" Lila looked at Ethan, then at Sophie. "I think we already are," she said. Ethan reached over and squeezed her hand gently. They arrived at Willow Street Cafe just as the first stars appeared. Inside, the same old table waited by the window, worn smooth from time. The waitress recognized them and smiled. "Your usual spot?" "Yes," Ethan said, glancing at Lila. "Our lucky table." As they sat down, the lights outside reflected on the glass like tiny fireflies. Lila opened her sketchbook and began to draw, her pencil gliding easily across the page. Ethan watched her, his heart full. "What are you drawing?" he asked. "Our beginning," she said, "the moment everything changed." He smiled. "Then draw it big. It deserves space." "No." And there, under the soft glow of cafe lights, surrounded by laughter and quiet joy, the story that began with a simple act of kindness found its calm middle, no longer about loneliness or loss, but about connection, forgiveness, and love that had grown quietly, steadily, and truly from the most ordinary of moments. A few weeks later, the early days of spring stretched into longer hours of sunlight and warmer afternoons. Willow Street Cafe had opened its windows again, and the air smelled of fresh bread and roasted beans. It was a Saturday morning, and the table by the window, their table, was waiting as always. Lila arrived first, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. She waved to the barista, who had already memorized her order: a cappuccino, one extra shot, and a small croissant. The sound of the espresso machine filled the background, steady and familiar. She looked out the window at the street beyond. Everything looked normal, peaceful, and yet something in her chest fluttered with quiet anticipation. Ethan and Sophie were supposed to meet her soon, but they were running late. That was rare for Ethan. 10 minutes later, the bell above the door chimed. Sophie ran in first, her red hat slightly askew. "Miss Lila!" she called out, her small voice filled with excitement. "Daddy said we have a surprise." Lila laughed as Sophie climbed into the chair beside her. "A surprise? Should I be nervous?" Before Sophie could answer, Ethan walked in. He carried a folder in one hand and a tired but genuine smile on his face. "Sorry we are late," he said. "Traffic was a mess, and someone insisted on stopping to pick daisies for you." Sophie held up a small bundle of flowers proudly. "Because daisies mean happiness." Lila accepted them with a soft smile. "Then I will keep them forever." Ethan placed the folder on the table. "Actually, these are for you too," he said. Lila frowned curiously. "What is this?" He slid the folder toward her. Inside were printed documents, some sketches, and a proposal letter with her name on it. "You remember the art program you wanted to start for underprivileged kids?" he said. "The one you mentioned months ago, but you said it was impossible without sponsors?" Lila's eyes widened. "You did not—" "I did," Ethan said gently. "Cole Group will fund it. We already have partners who want to contribute space and supplies. You will be the program's creative director." For a long moment, she could not speak. The cafe noise faded around her, replaced by the sound of her own heartbeat. "Ethan," she finally said, "this is too much." "It is not," he said firmly. "You once told me art helps children see color even when life feels gray. I believe in that. And I believe in you." Her voice trembled. "Why would you do this for me?" He met her eyes. "Because you brought life back into mine." Sophie looked between them, smiling proudly, as if she understood something much larger than her age could explain. "Miss Lila helps everyone draw happy things," she said. Lila felt tears forming at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. "You did not have to do this," she whispered. "I know," Ethan said, "but I wanted to." For a few seconds, silence stretched between them, soft, full, meaningful. Then Lila reached out and covered his hand with hers. "Thank you," she said, "for believing in what I love." Ethan squeezed her hand lightly. "It is easy to believe in something when you see what it can do." Sophie clapped her hands. "So that means Miss Lila is going to teach lots of kids now?" "Yes," Ethan said with a smile. "She is going to change their world." Lila laughed, shaking her head. One drawing at a time, the rest of the morning passed in a blur of laughter and planning. Lila told them her ideas for the art center walls filled with color, a small garden where children could paint outdoors, and weekend exhibits where families could come together. Ethan listened intently, offering practical help without overstepping. He had learned how to give her space, while still standing beside her. When the plans were set, they decided to walk through the neighborhood. The streets were alive with vendors and the first blossoms of spring. Sophie skipped between them, holding both their hands, humming a little tune. At the corner, they passed a newsstand. A glossy magazine cover caught Lila's eye. It featured a photo of Ethan standing beside a large donation check, the headline reading, "Cole Group funds new art initiative for local youth." Her breath caught. "You did not even tell me you made it public." He looked slightly sheepish. "The press found out before I could stop them. But if it helps the project, I will take the attention." She smiled. "You are getting better at this whole vulnerability thing." He grinned. "I am trying." "You are a good teacher." They crossed the street, sunlight flickering between buildings. Sophie pointed toward a mural on a nearby wall, bright colors of children playing under a tree. "It looks like you're painting, Miss Lila." "It does," Lila said softly. "Maybe it is a sign." As they walked, the gentle rhythm of the city surrounded them, cars, laughter, distant music. Lila felt a rare calmness, the kind that comes when every part of life feels like it is falling into place. They stopped at the park once more, the familiar one by the pond. Sophie ran ahead to feed the ducks, while Lila and Ethan stood by the bench. "You really did all of this for me," Lila said quietly. "Even after everything that happened." Ethan looked at her, his tone steady and sure. "I did it for us, for what we can build together." She met his gaze, and the world seemed to slow. There was no tension now, no hesitation, only truth. "You kept your promise," she said. "I plan to keep making new ones," he replied. Sophie's laughter echoed across the water. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting golden light over the pond. Lila leaned her head slightly toward Ethan's shoulder. He slipped his arm gently around her, not to possess, but to protect. And in that quiet, she realized that this was what trust looked like. Not grand declarations, not perfection, but consistency. The act of showing up, again and again, no matter how uncertain the world might be. As the light faded, Sophie ran back, breathless with excitement. "Daddy, Miss Lila, look, the ducks made a heart." They both looked down. 2 ducks floated side by side, their shapes forming a perfect heart on the water. Lila smiled. "I think even nature agrees with you, Sophie." "All," Ethan chuckled. "Then we should listen." Hand in hand, they began the walk home, the first stars appearing above the quiet city. Behind them, the park bench stood empty beneath the budding tree. waiting patiently just as it always had for the next chapter of their story to unfold. Spring deepened into full bloom, and the city slowly transformed. The streets of Maple Avenue shimmered with light rain in the mornings and warm sunsets in the evenings. Children's laughter echoed in the park again, and for the first time in a long time, Lila felt that the air itself carried something new hope that did not vanish overnight. The art program Ethan had helped her build officially opened that month. The center stood in a refurbished warehouse near the river, its tall windows painted in bright blues and yellows. On the front door, a simple hand-painted sign read, "The Color House." That morning, Lila unlocked the doors for the first time. Sunlight poured in, spilling across tables covered in brushes, jars of water, and boxes of crayons. The smell of paint filled the air. She stood for a long moment, just taking it in. This was what she had dreamed of: children from every background, gathering to create, to express, to heal. A small voice interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Lila?" She turned to see Sophie standing in the doorway, wearing her red hat and holding a bouquet of daisies. Ethan stood behind her, smiling proudly. Sophie ran forward and handed Lila the flowers. "For good luck," she said. "Daddy said all new beginnings need flowers." Lila knelt and hugged her. "Then these are perfect." Ethan stepped closer. "You did it, Lila. You made this place real." "We made it real," she corrected softly. "You, Sophie, and everyone who believed it could happen." He smiled. "You always find a way to share credit." "That is how art works," she said. "It only means something when it is shared." Oh. As the doors opened to welcome the first group of children, laughter quickly filled the room. Lila guided them to the tables, handing out brushes and paper while Ethan helped set up supplies. Sophie moved between them, showing other kids how to hold a brush, the way Miss Lila does. Watching them together, Lila felt something shift inside her, an ease she had never known before. This was not about status or fear or pretending anymore. It was about building something lasting, one small act of kindness at a time. By afternoon, the walls were covered in bright, uneven strokes of color. The kids had painted houses, stars, animals, and dreams. One little boy came up to Lila, holding his painting shyly. "Miss Lila," he said, "is this good?" She knelt beside him and smiled. "It is wonderful. Do you know why?" "Why?" he asked. "Because it looks like joy," she said. The boy grinned and ran off to show Ethan, who applauded as if it were a masterpiece. Sophie joined in, clapping enthusiastically. Later that evening, after the last child had left, Lila locked the doors and turned to find Ethan still standing near the window. He was staring at the mural the kids had made together, a field of flowers with a huge sun above it. "They did this in one day," he said quietly. "It is beautiful." "It is imperfect," she replied. "And that is what makes it perfect." "Hey." He looked at her, a small smile forming. "You sound like someone who has learned to forgive." She nodded slowly. "I think I finally have. Not just you, myself too." Ethan took a deep breath, his tone softer now. "Lila, I want to tell you something I have not said before." She turned toward him, curious. "What is it?" "When I met you, I was lost," he said. "Everyone saw me as the man who had everything, but I was empty. I thought success would fill the silence, but it never did. Then you came along with your sketches and your quiet strength, and you showed me that real wealth has nothing to do with numbers or status. It is about people who make the world feel lighter." Her throat tightened. "Ethan," he stepped closer. "I am not saying this to make you feel obligated. I am saying it because you deserve to know how much you changed my life." Lila blinked back the warmth in her eyes. "You changed mine too," she said. "You and Sophie both." "Oh." He smiled, looking toward the doorway where Sophie was humming softly to herself, arranging paintbrushes into neat rows. "She thinks the world of you, you know." "I think the world of her too," Lila said. "She is brave. She reminds me that healing is not loud. Sometimes it is just choosing to love again." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That is what you have done for both of us." They stood there in quiet understanding, while the evening light stretched long across the floor. Outside, the river shimmered, carrying the reflection of the city lights like liquid gold. Then Sophie skipped over, breaking the silence with her bright voice. "Daddy, Miss Lila, can we celebrate now? I brought cookies." Ethan laughed, bending down to her height. Cookies sound like the perfect celebration. They sat together on the floor of the art center, sharing cookies from a tin Sophie had decorated with stickers. Lila leaned back against the wall, her gaze sweeping over the painted space. She could almost see what it would become, a place where children's laughter and imagination would echo long after the paint dried. Ethan handed her a cookie and said quietly, "You know, I think this place will change lives." She looked at him, smiling. "It already has." The clock ticked softly in the background as night settled over the city. Sophie yawned and curled up against her father's arm, her tiny hand still smudged with paint. Ethan wrapped his coat around her shoulders, then glanced at Lila. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" he asked. Lila smiled faintly. "Every day, but for once, I am not afraid of it." He nodded slowly. "Neither am I." The sound of Sophie's quiet breathing filled the room. Outside, the rain began again, gentle and steady, tapping against the windows. Lila reached for her sketchbook and opened to a blank page. With deliberate strokes, she began to draw 3 figures sitting on a floor surrounded by color, a little girl asleep between them, and a world that felt, finally, at peace. As the last line met the paper, she whispered softly, "This is what happiness looks like." And beside her, Ethan smiled the kind of smile that only comes when a man realizes he has finally found home. A few weeks after the grand opening of the Color House, life began to find a new rhythm for everyone. The center had become a second home for dozens of children, and every day brought new laughter, paint stains, and stories that would cling to the walls like living color. Lila's mornings now started earlier than ever. She would unlock the doors just as the sunlight streamed through the windows, carrying the smell of fresh rain and hope. Ethan would drop Sophie off before heading to his office, though he often lingered longer than necessary, always pretending to help set up easels or refill paint water just to watch Lila's world come alive. One quiet Thursday afternoon, after the last group of students had gone home, Lila was still cleaning brushes when Ethan arrived unexpectedly. He stood at the doorway for a moment, watching her in the golden light. Her sleeves were rolled up, her hands smudged with blue paint, and yet she looked more at peace than anyone he had ever met. "You are supposed to be at work," she said without turning around. "I was," he replied, "but I wanted to see you instead." She looked up and smiled. "You know, if your board finds out the CEO of Cole Group keeps sneaking out of meetings to visit an art center, they might fire you." He grinned. "Then I will finally have time to take painting classes." "Bye," she laughed softly. "You would hate the mess." "I do not think I would mind it," he said, stepping closer. "Not if it means being here." The air between them grew still. Outside, the sky began to darken with the promise of another spring storm. Lila set down her brush. "You have that look again," she said gently. "What look?" "The one that says you are about to do something reckless." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I am." From his pocket, he pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wanted to show you something before I change my mind." She wiped her hands and took it. It was a letter official, stamped, and addressed to the board of Cole Group. Her eyes scanned the first few lines before she looked up at him in shock. "You are resigning?" He nodded slowly. "Yes." "Ethan, why?" she asked, stunned. "You built that company. It is your family's legacy." "I know," he said softly. "But somewhere along the way, I forgot what I was building it for. I have been living to protect something that stopped feeling like mine a long time ago." Lila was silent, searching his face. "And you are sure this is what you want?" "I am," he said firmly. "The company will be fine. It has good people running it. But Sophie only gets one childhood, and I only get one chance to live it with her. I do not want to miss that." Her chest tightened. "You are choosing peace," she said. "I am choosing life," he replied. "And maybe, if I am lucky, choosing love too." She looked away for a moment, trying to steady her breath. "You do not need to give up everything for me, Ethan." He shook his head. "I am not giving anything up. I am making space for something real." The rain began to fall outside, tapping gently against the windows. It filled the silence between them, a rhythm steady and soft. Lila folded the letter carefully. "What will you do next?" "I have an idea," he said. "I want to help expand the Color House. There are neighborhoods all over the city that could use a place like this. Maybe even other towns. You already started a movement, Lila. I just want to help it grow." Her eyes filled with quiet wonder. You mean that? Completely, he said. I want to work with you, not above you. I think we could build something that lasts. For a moment, she could not speak. Then she smiled through the tears that finally escaped. You always find ways to surprise me. He reached out, gently brushing a streak of paint from her cheek. You are the one who taught me how to see color again. Before either could say more, the door opened, and Sophie burst in, dripping wet from the rain, her backpack bouncing behind her. Daddy, Miss Lila, look what I made at school! She held out a paper crown decorated with glitter and stickers. It is for you, she said to Lila. Because you are the queen of colors. Oh, Lila knelt to hug her, laughing. It is beautiful. I will wear it proudly. Ethan smiled, watching the two of them together. I think it suits you, he said. They spent the rest of the evening inside as the storm raged outside. Sophie painted quietly at the far table, while Ethan and Lila sat near the window, sipping tea. The world beyond the glass was gray, but inside, the light from the lamps glowed warm and golden. Do you ever think about how it all started? Ethan asked. All the time, she said softly. One small act of kindness in a crowded cafe. It is strange how life works, isn't it? He nodded. Maybe not strange. Maybe it is just how fate says hello. She smiled. If fate had a voice, I think it would sound like Sophie. They both laughed quietly, glancing toward the little girl now asleep at her table, her brush still resting in her hand. Lila leaned her head lightly against Ethan's shoulder. So, what happens next? Tomorrow, he said, I send my letter, and after that we start working on the color house together. A partnership one built on paint and patience. She nodded. And trust. He smiled. Especially that. The rain outside softened to a drizzle. The night was calm again, filled only with the faint hum of the city and the sound of Sophie's slow, even breathing. In that quiet, Lila realized something. Sometimes love does not arrive with fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives in moments like this, steady, patient, built on shared purpose and simple truth. As Ethan reached over and covered her paint-stained hand with his, she whispered softly, This time, I am not afraid of tomorrow. And he answered, just as quietly, Neither am I. Oh, outside, the rain stopped completely, leaving behind the soft reflection of their little art center glowing like a lantern against the dark, proof that even the stormiest beginnings can lead to something beautifully whole. The following morning arrived with quiet sunlight spilling across the city. The storm had passed, leaving puddles that sparkled like glass and a calm that seemed to breathe through every street. Inside the color house, Lila stood by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the world wake up. Her reflection in the glass looked different, somehow lighter, freer. Ethan's resignation letter had been sent that morning. She had watched him press send, calm but resolute. His expression a mix of relief and anticipation. It was not just an ending. It was a beginning. A soft knock pulled her from her thoughts. Sophie peeked through the door, still in her pajamas and holding her sketchbook. Miss Lila, Daddy says breakfast is ready. Lila turned and smiled. Already? It feels too early for breakfast. Sophie giggled. Daddy said you skipped dinner last night because you were working, so he made pancakes with blueberries. He said that is the rule for artists who forget to eat. Lila laughed and followed her into the kitchen. Ethan stood by the stove, sleeves rolled up, flipping pancakes with the focus of a man who took his second chance at life seriously. The table was already set 3 plates, a vase of daisies, and a small note card in Sophie's handwriting that said, Family Breakfast Day. Someone's organized, Lila teased. Ethan turned with a smile. We had a team meeting this morning, he said, nodding toward Sophie. She voted for extra syrup. I voted against it. She won. Sophie cheered. Democracy! Lila sat down, laughing. I am not sure democracy works that way. It does in this house, Ethan said, setting a plate in front of her. Eat before it gets cold. They ate together in warm silence, broken only by Sophie's chatter about school and art projects. Every few minutes, she would show one of her new sketches, and Ethan would praise her as though each one belonged in a museum. After breakfast, Lila helped Sophie clean up while Ethan stepped outside to take a call. The morning light fell across the table, catching the golden pendant around her neck, the tiny paintbrush he had given her weeks ago. She touched it absent-mindedly and smiled. "Miss Lila," Sophie said, carefully stacking plates, "are you going to marry my dad?" The question came so innocently that Lila almost dropped the dish in her hands. "What makes you ask that?" she said, her cheeks flushing. Sophie shrugged. "You make him laugh. He did not used to laugh like that before you. Grandma said sometimes grown-ups find their missing piece when they are not looking for it. I think you are his missing piece." "Oh?" Lila's heart softened. "Your grandma is very wise." "So are you," Sophie said, serious as ever. "You help people feel happy again. Even Daddy." Before Lila could respond, Ethan came back inside. "You two are plotting something, I can tell," he said, pretending to narrow his eyes. Sophie grinned. "It is a secret." He laughed. "I am sure it is." Later that day, they went to the park, the same park where everything had begun. The grass had grown bright green again, and the ducks floated lazily across the pond. Lila spread a blanket while Sophie chased bubbles from a small plastic wand. Ethan sat beside her, leaning back on his hands, watching his daughter with quiet admiration. "She has grown so much," he said softly. "She used to be shy around everyone. Now she runs the world." "That is what safety does," Lila replied. "It gives kids wings." He glanced at her. "You gave her that." Lila shook her head. "You did. You built a home for her heart." He paused for a moment, then said, "Do you ever think about what comes next? For us?" She looked at him, uncertain but open. "I think about it," she admitted. "But I do not have all the answers yet." "Neither do I," he said. "But maybe that is the point. Maybe we are not supposed to have everything figured out." They watched Sophie dance along the edge of the pond, her laughter floating through the air like a song. Lila smiled faintly. "She makes everything look so simple." "She does," Ethan said, "because for her, love is not complicated. It is just showing up every day." Lila turned toward him. "And you have shown up, Ethan. For her, for this place, for yourself." He exhaled slowly. "You taught me how." A gentle breeze rustled the trees above them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "I was saving this for later," he said, handing it to her. Lila opened it carefully. Inside was a simple sketch, a pencil drawing of a cafe table, 3 cups of coffee, and sunlight pouring through a window. Beneath it were the words, "The day everything began." Her eyes filled with tears. "You drew this?" He smiled, a little shyly. "Sophie helped. She said it was time I learned to draw my own happy things." Lila laughed softly through her tears. "It is beautiful. It is a reminder," he said, "that sometimes the smallest choices lead to the biggest changes." She nodded, her voice quiet. "It feels like a lifetime ago. And yet, here we are," he said. Sophie ran back, throwing herself between them with a burst of joy. "Can we get ice cream before we go home?" Ethan grinned. "Only if Miss Lila says yes." Lila pretended to think. I suppose we can make that happen." Sophie cheered and took both their hands. "Then it is a perfect day." As they walked toward the ice cream stand, hand in hand, the sun broke through the clouds, painting the park in gold. The air smelled of grass and springtime and something sweeter, something that felt like destiny fulfilled. And as Ethan looked at Lila, her hair glowing in the light and her laughter mingling with Sophie's, he thought about how far they had all come. From grief to gratitude, from loneliness to love. Lila turned to him and smiled, as if she had read his thoughts. "We are exactly where we are supposed to be." Ethan nodded. "Yes, right here." And for the first time in years, he did not feel like a man rebuilding his life. He felt like a man living it fully. Honestly. Surrounded by the 2 people who had quietly taught him what happiness really meant. The following weeks passed quietly, the kind of peace that settles, not because life is perfect, but because people have finally learned to live honestly. The Color House had become a heartbeat in the community, and every morning, the sound of children's laughter greeted Lila like music. One warm afternoon, she stood by the long window that faced the river. The light spilled through the glass, illuminating jars of paint and brushes like small pieces of stained glass. She could hear Sophie's laughter in the next room, where Ethan was helping her hang a row of paper birds made by the younger kids. "Higher, Daddy," Sophie called out. "They have to look like they are flying." Ethan stretched, groaning. If I go any higher, I will be on the ceiling. Lila smiled, setting down her brush. She walked into the other room, wiping her hands on her apron. It looks wonderful, she said. This place keeps getting brighter every week. Ethan turned, smiling at her. That is because you fill it with color. Sophie nodded seriously. Miss Lila's magic paint makes everything happy. Lila knelt to adjust one of the paper birds. I think your magic helps too, she said. You made these with care. That is what brings them to life. Sophie grinned proudly. Then we all have magic. Ethan laughed softly. That is true. The afternoon drifted by gently. When the children were picked up by their parents and the last brushes had been washed, Ethan stayed behind to help Lila close up. The two of them moved in quiet rhythm, sweeping, organizing, and turning off the lights. As Lila was locking the back door, Ethan's phone buzzed on the counter. He hesitated before checking it. A faint crease formed on his forehead as he read the message. Lila noticed immediately. Bad news? He sighed. Not exactly. The board of Cole Group sent an invitation. They are hosting a gala next month, apparently. They want to honor my years of service before they announce the new leadership officially. That sounds like a good thing, she said carefully. It is, he admitted, but it feels strange, like closing a chapter I never thought would end. Lila stepped closer. You gave them years of your life. You built that company from the ground up. You have every right to feel conflicted. He nodded slowly. I just wonder if walking away makes me look weak. Her voice was steady. No, Ethan. It makes you human, and brave enough to choose peace over pride. He looked at her, eyes softening. You always know how to make things clearer. Oh, that is what artists do, she said with a small smile. We turn messes into meaning. For a moment, silence filled the room, the kind that did not need words. Then Ethan said quietly, Would you come with me? To the gala, I mean. Lila blinked, surprised. Me? Yes. You helped me become the man I am now. You deserve to be there for the ending of one story and the start of another. Her heart skipped. I do not belong in that kind of world, Ethan. You know that. Oh, he shook his head gently. You belong wherever kindness is needed, and I would like you by my side. She hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of the counter. If you are sure, then, yes, I will go. A quiet smile touched his face. Thank you. That evening, as they walked home, Sophie skipped ahead of them, humming softly. The sun was setting over the river, turning the sky gold and pink. Lila felt a calm. She could not quite describe a certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. The following days were busy with preparations. Sophie made it her personal mission to help Lila choose a dress, declaring herself Fashion Consultant of the Year. She spent hours sketching possible designs in crayon, each one brighter and more glittery than the last. One afternoon, while Lila was sorting through fabric swatches, Sophie said innocently, Miss Lila, when you go to that party with Daddy, will you dance? Lila laughed. I do not know if there will be dancing. There has to be, Sophie said with conviction. Every happy story has dancing at the end. Ethan, who was standing nearby, smiled. I think she might be right. When the day of the gala finally arrived, the city glowed under a sky of soft stars. The event was held in a grand ballroom filled with polished marble and golden light. Lila stood beside Ethan as they entered, her nerves fluttering at the sight of so many people in elegant clothes. Ethan leaned close and whispered, You look beautiful. And before you say it, yes, you belong here. She smiled shyly. Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself. Oh. They greeted old colleagues. And Ethan gave his farewell speech a simple, heartfelt reflection about legacy, integrity, and the importance of purpose over power. When he mentioned the color house, people applauded warmly. Afterward, the music began, soft and slow. Ethan turned to her. Sophie said every happy story needs a dance. Lila laughed quietly. She did say that. He offered his hand. Shall we make her right? She hesitated for a moment, then placed her hand in his. They moved together gently under the golden light, surrounded by quiet conversation and the sound of strings. For a moment, the room seemed to fade away, leaving only them, the man who had once been lost in duty, and the woman who had shown him how to live again. When the song ended, Lila looked up at him, her voice soft. "So what happens after this?" He smiled. "We go home. We wake up tomorrow. We keep building what matters." She nodded. "Together? Always," he said. Later that night, as they drove back through the quiet city, the car lights reflected off the river. Sophie was asleep in the back seat, her head resting on her sketchbook. Lila leaned her head against the window, watching the lights shimmer. Ethan reached over, taking her hand in his. "You know," he said softly, "I think this might be the first chapter of something even better." Lila squeezed his hand gently. "Then let's make sure we write it right." And as the car rolled through the sleeping city, their fingers remained intertwined, a simple, steady promise that whatever storms came next, they would face them not as strangers, but as a family bound by love, truth, and the quiet courage to start again. A month after the gala, life moved forward with a quiet steadiness that felt almost sacred. The days were warmer now, filled with sunlight that lingered long into the evenings. The color house continued to bloom like a living heartbeat, walls covered with new artwork each week, laughter echoing through every corner, and little hands creating things that seemed to hold entire worlds. Lila had found her rhythm between teaching, sketching, and spending more time with Ethan and Sophie. It was not just routine anymore, it was life, real and ordinary in the most extraordinary way. One Friday afternoon, the three of them decided to take a weekend trip outside the city. It was Sophie's idea, of course. She had been talking about seeing the ocean for weeks, and Ethan finally gave in after she drew a map of how to get there, complete with glittered arrows and a smiling Sunday. They packed lightly. Lila brought her sketchbook, Ethan carried a camera, and Sophie, of course, brought a backpack full of crayons, snacks, and her stuffed rabbit named Daisy. The drive was long but peaceful. Music played softly in the background, and Sophie's laughter filled the spaces between songs. Lila watched from the passenger seat as Ethan drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near hers. The sunlight hit his face in a way that made him look calm, as if the weight he once carried had finally lifted. "Do you realize," she said quietly, "this is the first time I have seen you relax since we met?" He smiled. "Maybe I just needed the right company." "Oh," Sophie leaned forward from the back seat. "Are you talking about me?" Ethan chuckled. "Of course we are. You are the captain of this trip." Sophie grinned proudly. "Good, because Daisy says we have to stop for ice cream before we see the water." Lila laughed. "I think Daisy is very wise." By the time they reached the coast, the sky had begun to turn golden. The ocean stretched wide and endless before them, waves shimmering in the late afternoon light. Sophie ran ahead, squealing with delight as she kicked off her shoes and let the waves chase her feet. Lila and Ethan followed slowly, the sand cool beneath their steps. She watched Sophie dance along the shoreline, her laughter carried by the wind, and her heart swelled. "She belongs here," Lila said softly. "So free, so full of light." Ethan nodded. "She gets that from you." Lila shook her head, smiling. "No, she gets that from being loved." "No." For a while, they just stood there in silence, the rhythm of the waves filling the spaces where words were not needed. Then Ethan said quietly, "You know, I used to bring my wife here." Lila looked up at him gently. "Sophie's mother?" He nodded. She loved the ocean. She said it reminded her that everything passes, the pain, the joy, the uncertainty. It all moves like the tide. He paused for a long moment. "I have not been back here since she passed. I guess I was afraid it would hurt too much." Lila reached for his hand, her voice steady. "And does it?" He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the horizon. "It does not. It feels like remembering her the way she would want to be remembered, with life still moving forward." She squeezed his hand gently. "Then maybe this was exactly where you were supposed to be today." Sophie came running back toward them, holding a handful of seashells. "Look, I found treasure," she shouted, breathless with excitement. "One for Daddy, one for Miss Lila, and one for Daisy." Ethan knelt, smiling. "That is very generous of you, sweetheart." Sophie placed a small shell in Lila's palm. "This one is yours," she said. "It is shaped like a heart." Lila looked down, and indeed, the shell was curved perfectly, smooth and pale pink. "It is beautiful," she said softly. They spent the rest of the afternoon building sandcastles and watching the sunset. Sophie insisted that Lila draw their castle before the waves washed it away. So Lila took out her sketchbook and began to draw 3 figures in the fading light, hand in hand beside the sea. As the sun disappeared, they sat wrapped in blankets, the sound of the ocean lulling Sophie to sleep. Lila rested her head on Ethan's shoulder. "Do you ever think," she asked quietly, "about how different our lives might have been if that day at the cafe had never happened?" "All the time," he said, "and every time I do, I remind myself how lucky I was that it did." She smiled softly. "Fate really does have strange ways." Ethan turned slightly toward her. "I used to think fate was just luck in disguise, but now I think it is something else. It is kindness returning when you least expect it." Lila's eyes softened. "Kindness brought us here, and love kept us here," he added gently. They sat together in the growing dark, the waves whispering against the sand. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt no ghosts, no guilt, no shadows of what had been, only gratitude for what he had lost, what he had found, and what he was finally ready to build. Later, when they walked back to their small beach house, Sophie stirred in his arms. "Daddy," she murmured sleepily, "did we find the ocean's magic?" Ethan smiled down at her. "We did, sweetheart. We really did." Lila glanced up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "She will remember this day forever." "So will I," he said. As the night deepened and the waves sang softly beyond the dunes, the 3 of them sat on the porch, watching the stars rise over the horizon. The air smelled of salt and promise, and the world felt both infinite and small at once. Ethan turned to Lila and said quietly, "This right here is everything I never knew I needed." Lila smiled, leaning into him. "Then, hold on to it." "All?" He nodded, wrapping his arm around her as Sophie slept peacefully between them. "I plan to," he whispered, and under the blanket of stars, with the ocean breathing steadily in the distance, it felt as if the universe itself paused for a moment, content, calm, and full of color. The morning after their trip to the ocean began with the soft sound of waves brushing the shore and sunlight streaming through the white curtains of the small beach house. The air smelled faintly of salt and warm sand. Lila woke first. She sat up slowly, watching the light dance across the wooden floor, and for a moment, she simply listened to the rhythm of the sea, to the quiet peace that filled the room. Sophie was still asleep, her tiny hand resting against her stuffed rabbit, Daisy. Ethan was in the kitchen, humming under his breath as he prepared breakfast. The smell of pancakes and fresh coffee drifted through the air. When Lila walked in, he looked up with a smile. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning," she replied, her voice still wrapped in sleep. "You are cooking again? Should I be worried?" He laughed. "I have improved, I promise. The pancakes are edible this time." She took a seat at the small wooden table. "You said that last time, and Sophie needed extra syrup to survive them." "Ah," he said, pretending to look offended. "You wound me." Lila smiled and poured herself a cup of coffee. "You seem different today." He flipped a pancake carefully. "Different how?" "Peaceful," she said. "Like you are where you are supposed to be." He glanced at her over his shoulder. "Maybe I am. You and Sophie, you gave me that." Her expression softened. "We gave each other that." By the time Sophie woke up, the table was covered with pancakes, berries, and a small vase holding a single daisy she had picked the day before. She rubbed her eyes and smiled sleepily. "It smells like happiness," she said. Ethan kissed the top of her head. "That is because it is happiness." After breakfast, they decided to spend one last morning on the beach before driving home. Sophie ran ahead, carrying her small bucket, ready to collect more shells for what she called her ocean museum. Lila and Ethan walked side by side along the shoreline, their shoes dangling from their hands. The tide rolled gently over their feet, cool and soft. "It feels strange," she said quietly. "How everything can change, yet feel exactly right." He nodded. "That is how you know it is real." For a while they walked in silence, letting the wind carry away their thoughts. Then Ethan stopped, looking out at the endless horizon. "Lila," he said, "I want to ask you something." She turned to him, a little wary but curious. "What is it?" He took a breath, his voice steady. "You have been part of our lives for months now. You are Sophie's favorite person, and honestly, mine too. I cannot imagine this life without you in it. So I need to know, what would you say if I asked you to stay? Not just for today, or next week. For good. Lila's eyes widened. Ethan, he continued gently, I am not asking for an answer right now. I just want you to know what my heart wants. I have spent years chasing things that never mattered, and now that I finally have something that does, I am not going to pretend it is temporary. She looked at him, her heart full. You are serious. I have never been more serious in my life, he said quietly. But I want it to be your choice. You have built your world here, with the children, the art, the freedom you fought for. I would never take that from you. She stepped closer, her voice trembling slightly. You would not be taking it. You would be part of it. Before either of them could say more, Sophie's voice called from down the beach. Daddy! Miss Lila! Come see what I found. They turned to see her waving excitedly, crouched near the water. She held something small and shiny in her hand. Ethan smiled. Saved by the bell, he whispered, half teasing, half relieved. They walked toward Sophie, who was grinning proudly. It is a tiny bottle, she said. Look, there is paper inside. Lila knelt beside her. It looks like a message in a bottle. Sophie handed it to her. Can we open it? Lila carefully pulled out the cork and unfolded the damp paper. The writing was faded, but a few words were still legible. To whoever finds this, may you always remember that love is the only thing that floats. Sophie gasped. It is magic. Ethan looked at Lila. Maybe it is a sign. Lila smiled softly, reading the words again. Love is the only thing that floats, she murmured. Maybe that is true. Ah. Sophie ran back toward the waves to find more treasures, leaving Ethan and Lila standing together. The ocean breeze lifted her hair as she turned toward him. You always find ways to make the universe speak, do you know that? He smiled. I think the universe just likes proving us right. When they finally packed up and drove home, the car was filled with the sound of Sophie's gentle humming. She had fallen asleep holding the little bottle, her treasure from the sea. As they drove, Lila glanced out the window at the setting Sunday. The light washed everything in gold, the kind of color that felt like memory and promise at once. Ethan, she said softly, about what you asked earlier. He looked at her quickly, but she continued before he could speak. You do not need to wait for an answer. You already have it. He smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. Then I am the luckiest man alive. She reached over and rested her hand on his. We both are. Oh. The car continued down the quiet coastal road, the horizon stretching endlessly ahead. The wind carried the faint sound of waves behind them, as if the ocean itself was whispering blessings for what lay ahead. And somewhere between the sea and the sky, between the past and the future, three hearts, one man, one woman, one child moved forward together, bound by the simple, unshakable truth that love, indeed, was the only thing that could ever stay afloat. 2 weeks after their return from the ocean, life found its gentle rhythm again. The days at the color house were filled with children's laughter, streaks of color, and the smell of paint that always lingered in the air. Yet something about Lila had changed. There was a softness in her smile, a quiet glow that came from finally allowing herself to belong. Ethan noticed it too. He arrived at the art center every morning with Sophie, who now called it our happy place. Sometimes he would help carry supplies or fix a shelf. Other times he would just stand in the doorway, watching Lila teach with a kind of admiration he could not hide. One late afternoon, as the last group of children waved goodbye, Lila sat by the window with her sketchbook. The sun was setting behind the river, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. She drew without thinking 3 figures standing by the ocean, holding hands, with a tiny bottle floating on the waves. Ethan approached quietly, resting his hand on the table. That looks familiar, Lila smiled. It is what I remember most from that day, the feeling that everything was exactly where it should be. He sat beside her. I have been thinking about something, he said. I want to create a scholarship fund through the Color House, for kids who cannot afford art materials or classes. Maybe we could name it after Sophie's idea, the Kindness Project. Lila's heart warmed. That is beautiful, Ethan. She will be so proud. He nodded. It feels right, like giving back the way you taught me to. They sat in silence for a while, watching the light fade. Sophie's laughter drifted from the next room as she played with her paints, humming a tune she had made up herself. Lila closed her sketchbook slowly. You kept your promise. she said softly. You chose peace, and now you are helping others find it too. Ethan turned toward her. You showed me how. Oh. The sound of Sophie's footsteps broke the stillness. She ran over, holding a new painting. Look, it is us, she said proudly. And the sky is full of hearts because happy people make the world brighter. Lila and Ethan looked at each other and smiled. She is right, Lila whispered. And as the first stars appeared above the river, it felt as though the world had quietly agreed. The following spring arrived quietly, with soft mornings and long afternoons filled with sunlight. The color house had grown busier than ever. Its walls now carried layers of stories, paintings, handprints, and the echoes of laughter from every child who had found hope there. On a Saturday morning, the community gathered for the first annual art showcase. The event was part of the New Kindness Project, a scholarship program Ethan and Lila had started together. The courtyard buzzed with excitement as families admired the artwork, each piece filled with life and innocence. Sophie stood proudly beside her, painting a big, bright canvas, showing 3 people holding hands under a sky full of hearts. The sign below read, "My family of colors." When Lila saw it, her heart swelled. "It is perfect," she said softly. Sophie beamed. "I wanted everyone to know that love makes everything brighter." Ethan looked at his daughter, his voice full of warmth. "You are the best artist I know." The crowd applauded as Lila stepped forward to give her closing speech. Her voice was calm, steady, and full of quiet joy. This place began with a simple idea that art can heal. But what I have learned is that healing is not about fixing what is broken. It is about finding beauty in the pieces that remain. Every child who walks through these doors teaches me that kindness is a form of art too. Applause filled the courtyard, and for a moment, she met Ethan's eyes across the crowd. The world seemed to slow, just as it had that first day in the cafe. Later, after the guests had left and the sun had dipped low behind the river, the 3 of them sat on the steps outside the color house. The air was cool, carrying the faint sound of water and the distant hum of the city. Sophie leaned against her father's arm, yawning. "Daddy, Miss Lila, do you think the stars are paintings too?" Lila smiled. "Maybe they are the universe's way of saying thank you for all the love people give." Ethan wrapped his arm around both of them. "Then we will keep painting," he said quietly, "every day." Lila rested her head against his shoulder. "Together," she said. They sat in silence, watching the night unfold. The windows of the color house glowed softly behind them, warm and golden, like a promise kept. In that stillness, it was clear what they had built was more than an art center. It was a home one born not from perfection, but from courage, forgiveness, and love that chose to stay. As the stars shimmered above, Sophie whispered, half asleep, "Love is the only thing that floats." Ethan smiled. "Yes, sweetheart, it always does." And under the vast, quiet sky, they stayed there 3 hearts. One story proof that even from the simplest acts of kindness, whole new worlds can begin.